Excellent panel on the circular carbon economy from concept to implementation. I'll introduce our panel. We have Thamir Shehri from the Climate and Sustainability team in KAPSARC, who will give us an overview on the Circular Carbon Economy Index results for Saudi Arabia. He will set the scene for us to discuss the Saudi Arabia case for the circular carbon economy concept and how to move from concept to implementation. We will have Her Highness Princess Msha'al al-Sha'lan, who's the co-founder of Aeon, an Aeon collective, who will give us a perspective from a think tank perspective. And then we will move to Dr. Mustafa Babikir from Saudi Aramco, who will give us the perspective from the industry. And what does it mean to implement CCE projects? And then finally, we will hear from the policymakers, Hammam Al-Ghamdi, he's from the Circular Carbon Economy National Program at the Ministry of Energy, who will give us the perspective of policymakers. And then we'll have the discussion, a discussion-led conversation. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Thamir, but just wanted to highlight and to give a bit of an introduction to the concept. So the circular carbon economy was formulated under the Saudi G20 presidency, and it was endorsed by all the G20 countries in the G20 Riyadh summit in 2020. So it has been 3 years since the concept has been launched, and there's been a lot of interest around the framework. Both there are opportunities, but also challenges in moving the concept of circular economy to implementation. So today we will explore these opportunities and challenges, and hopefully we'll come up with insights that can inform policymakers. The floor is yours, Thamir.
Thank you so much, Noura. Someone can provide me with the clickers? Yes.
Maybe it's in the... Can we have the clicker, please? I think it's maybe on the podium.
Green one?
No, it's not working.
Okay.
Sorry for that. Thank you so much, Noura. It's my pleasure to be here and present the collective work of various teams at KAPSARC here. The CCE Index, the Circular Carbon Economy Index, it's a quantitative tool of the Circular Carbon Economy framework. We actually we will have a glimpse on the index, why we build the index, and a deep dive on the second edition, 2022 edition that focus on Saudi Arabia. So as Noura mentioned, what we are, the circular carbon economy, or what we are trying to measure here, is the moving from a linear emission accounting to this circular carbon economy. We can see what you are seeing here is the different technology and activities under the 4 pillars. The CCE consists of these 3 pillars: reduce, recycle, reuse, which actually taken from the famous circular economy, and it add the remove pillars on that. It focus on the energy and emissions instead of materials and products. So in a sense, it's a mitigation framework. It's a holistic mitigation framework, technology agnostic approach for enable effective and efficient emission reduction. The ultimate aim is avoiding atmospheric emission, and the ultimate goal is reaching net zero emission. As Noura mentioned, it's endorsed by the G20 leader, and in its core, each country will have its own pathway and technology mix. So recapping the framework and the concept, what we are trying to do is build a quantitative framework to measure country performance and progress towards the carbon circularity in diverse contexts, which is a tool that will support policy discussion and planning, and we will actually examine that quickly. So the CCE Index, what the CCE Index is trying to answer is how are countries engaging with diverse mitigation options and technology in terms of both depth and diversity, and how countries' decision to accelerate progress towards CCE, and we will see that in the enabler sub-index. How different region and countries' performance in the CCE today, and how much potential do they have to accelerate their transition. I will go quickly with the framework. So here we have the CCE Index framework. You can see on the left the performance score, which actually measure the current performance, today performance, country performance on these 8 activities and technologies: energy efficiency, renewable, electrification, nuclear, fuel switching, natural sinks, CCUS, and hydrogen, which is the core of the CCE concept. On the right side, we are measuring the enabler, or how countries are positioned towards the CCEs. And we have 5 dimensions: policies, technologies, finance, business, and system resilience, which actually collectively will actually give a broader picture of how countries positioned toward carbon circularity. We have also an add-on called the oil producer lens performance, which add additional indicators to measure top oil and gas producer countries. We think that these common metrics between these countries will give a clearer picture on how they transition, especially for the hard-to-abate sectors. So for the second edition, we have 64 countries. We start with 30 countries in 2021, and we added 64 countries for the second edition, which actually cover more than 90% of the global economy and the global greenhouse gas emissions. Here, a quick high-level message on the 2022 results. The winner, the top countries or the winners of this edition are the 5 European countries: Norway, Netherlands, Germany, UK, and Switzerland, received the highest CCE Index score. I'm talking about the total score. In the area of CCE performance, country engaged in more CCE activities, which tend to have higher performance score. In the area of enabler, technology and finance, we can see clearly that they contribute to the largest gap across all countries. And most countries have indicated at least some improvement of the total CCE index from last year. Here we have the 2022 CCE index score for the 64 countries. Since we are focusing in Saudi Arabia, you can see the total score for Saudi Arabia, which is half of the score come from performance and the other half come from enabler, and it ranked 22 on this year. If we go to the performance, we can see Saudi is performing much better. It's above the average. It ranked 18, and this result or this score actually driven by the ambitious hydrogen pipeline or the green hydrogen pipeline, fuel switching, electrification, and also energy efficiency. If we look at the enabler, we can see Saudi Arabia is performing less than performance, of course, and we can see clearly the gaps in the enablers, which actually more on the technology and finance. Here we can see the Saudi score on the technology, 26. This is an example of how you deconstruct the index score for a specific country to see where is its gap, what is its strength, and an example of how policymakers can actually take advantage of this data. And we can see here under the technology dimension that Saudi Arabia it has most of the score driven by the university and industry technical collaboration indicator and the contribution to the economy, the output, but it actually gaps in the expenditure and the patents and the research intensity, which show where is the area that need to be focused on. And on the finance, again, it's clearly that carbon pricing is one of the gaps. The CCE investment, access to sustainable finance, and when you go deeper with the indicators and data, you actually can gain more insight on how the country is positioned in this indicator. Here we can see that Saudi is improving from the 2021 score. And again, it actually increased their score in the performance and the enabler side, but it can do much better, especially in the enabler side, if we capture or the data can go through the data provider pipeline. Here, quickly, we will look at the oil producer lens. We can see Saudi Arabia is performing much better here. We give credit to the carbon intensity of the crude oil and the flaring intensity of oil production. Here is an example of how you can actually see the Saudi result in different groups or country groups that it gives a different meaning to the result and different angle to expert and policymaker. Here we can see how Saudi are positioned in the MENA region. We can see that Saudi is actually rank second of the group of the countries. And if we look at the income, we can see Saudi score fourth on the high income non-OECD countries. Here is an example. I'm just giving you examples here how you can actually interpret the result and the score in different ways. So here we will give a snapshot on how the index will help policy simulation, policy mapping, and in the local context. Here we built an actually online tool that everyone, I welcome everyone to visit the public domain and take advantage of this. One of the example is the CCE Index Lab, where we give the user or the expert the freedom to tackle the indicator weight and the indicator value. So you can see or project your country rank and score in different contexts. Here is an example of how national policy goal or focus area can map to the or relevant to the CCE Index indicator. For example, the 50% of electricity generated from renewables goal that we have here in Saudi Arabia can go directly to the renewable energy indicator in the index, and fuel switching, planting 10 billion trees, it will actually speak directly to the natural sink indicator. And other initiative under SEEK, it will actually go for the energy efficiency indicator, which measure the energy intensity of the GDP. And in the enabler side, just a few examples: the green sukuk bonds that issued by PIF. Again, it's relevant to the access to sustainable finance indicator, and different investment product speak to the CCE investment indicator and access to finance. Also, the voluntary exchange platform, the Riyadh a voluntary exchange platform for offset and carbon credit. We'll speak directly to carbon pricing indicator. Just a note here, we are measuring the carbon pricing indicator through the World Bank carbon pricing dashboard. So it depends again on the data source, how they will interpret this data. Thank you so much. I hope I'm not excessive.
Thank you very much, Thamir, for this excellent presentation on the CCE Index. I think the audience now have a better idea of what the CCE Index is, what are the indicators that are used, how the weights can be changed through the simulation, and the different countries and how they perform using the CCE indicators. We'd love to hear from the different perspectives we have with us here on the panel, the policymakers, the industry, and the think tank. I'd like to start with you, Humam. If you can give us an overview on the CCE national program and what initiatives you have, and perhaps also reflect on the indicators we have here on the index.
Thank you, Noura. Thank you, Thamir. And thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Humam Al-Ghamdi. I work for the Circular Carbon Economy National Program within the Ministry of Energy. It's a pleasure being amongst you here, and it's an honor. It's an honor to share the Ministry of Energy Circular Carbon Economy Program objectives and ambitions. So, as Noura mentioned earlier, in November 2020, after the G20 leaders' endorsement of the Circular Carbon Economy Framework, the Kingdom have launched its Circular Carbon Economy National Program with the aim of consolidating the goals for sustainability, while also accelerating several applications and efforts in that field. In 2021, the Kingdom have also announced its commitment to reach net zero by 2060, another indicator of the Kingdom's commitment to reducing carbon emissions and managing it. The program, or the framework, in its essence, targets maximizing benefit of the CO2, while also maneuvering through the regulatory aspects, making sure that these applications are born in a healthy and sustainable manner. The framework entails four main levers. It includes the reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove. In the reduce lever, major efforts are mainly in the utilization of, let's say, renewables, the basically usage of hydrogen as fuel. Of course, energy efficiency is the easiest or simplest effort to be done in that lever. In the reuse aspect, applications exist such as EOR, where we have here in the Kingdom one of the major EOR pilots in Uthmaniyah. Of course, on the recycle lever, we have the carbon to, or applications exist such as the carbon to chemicals and the carbon to fuel. On the remove lever, of course, several applications exist such as the nature-based solutions. It also includes the mineralization or direct air capture technologies. These are the main levers under the CCE, let's say, framework, yet the national program is responsible for, let's say, part of those levers. The energy, it includes majority of these levers applications, but it excludes the energy efficiency part and the renewables under the reduction. The aim is to actually zoom into CO2. How can we make it basically valuable? How can we make use of that CO2 in these several applications? The Kingdom have also announced one of the largest carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects with a target to capture 44 million tons per annum by 2035. The first phase was also announced of this project back in COP27, where the aim is to capture 9 million tons of CO2 per annum by 2027. On the hydrogen front, the kingdom intends to become the main exporter of hydrogen in the region. So the target is to produce 4 million tons of hydrogen by 2030, and work has already begun in the city of Neom to conduct one of the largest green hydrogen projects. These efforts or these applications will, of course, materialize while partnering with the many stakeholders here in the kingdom. So the Ministry of Energy role is to nurture, to combine, to remove obstacles along these applications way, but also partner with these stakeholders and more to give birth to similar applications in the future.
Thank you very much, Humam, for this overview on the initiatives, and perhaps we'll dig deeper in the second round to really understand how the relationship between this program and the stakeholders and how to really implement and who are the implementers. If I can get your view, Masha'al, so for all these initiatives, what challenges do you see, particularly in the financial, from the financial perspectives and the investments needed and the gaps that we see to get these off the ground, these concepts and these initiatives towards implementation?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Noura. I think what we tend to forget in a lot of these conversations is what are we really trying to do with finance? I think what we're really trying to do is to be inclusive, to develop, to scale up and unlock innovation. And if you allow me maybe to first focus on the inclusive and develop aspect of the equation. One thing that tends to be maybe forgotten about is the right for energy justice. And when we're really thinking about it, we have to think of the scale of the problem before we think of how do we need to fund it and finance it. So if we're talking about energy justice, that has to be part and parcel and integral to how we tackle climate change. The vast amount of energy that's currently being used versus what we're currently hearing, the funding being drawn towards, is not in the household level. Household is maybe around 5% globally, residential use, but it's mostly in industry, commerce, agriculture, and transportation. So when we're really thinking about it, we have to think about what are we promising these developing countries. Is there just a right to screw in a few light bulbs? I know my colleagues from the IEA are here, so this is not a stab at you guys. But if we think about the metrics that are currently being used, if we think about the modern access to energy, that's currently around 100 kilowatt hours in cities, around 50 kilowatt hours in rural areas, so nowhere near the need to electrify an AC, barely enough on an annual basis to light up a few light bulbs in some hours of the day, if possible, maybe a fan, but nothing that's tied to cooling, and by cooling I mean refrigerating, cooking, so that's something that's out of the equation. And when we did make a promise with the SDGs, when we spoke about SDG 7, we spoke about affordable and reliable energy, and we tend to be forgetting about the affordable and the reliable part of the equation. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but we have to really remember that when we're trying to fulfill these promises, we're trying to unlock the creativity of those humans within that continent. So it's not only about getting them light, but it's about getting them a future that we should all be aspiring towards. And then maybe to delve a bit on the scale-up and unlocking of innovation, to steal a bit of your slides, Thamir, you've really highlighted the gap in Saudi on CCE performance and the tech and development finance. I think to date, please correct me if I'm wrong, the most up-to-date estimation that we have from the IEA was around 65 billion to get us to a net zero pathway. I'm hoping that you guys are working on an updated number, because as we're really trying to understand what are those nuances, we're starting to understand what we have not accounted for in a lot of cases. We're starting to take the issue of carbon pricing quite seriously in the kingdom, so we've all been hearing about the regional voluntary carbon mechanism that's been deployed. What's not being said enough, I think that it is a regulated mechanism, meaning that for a lot of the credits that are being sold, that there's a lot of maturity on the quality of what's being developed. So it's not only the quality, it's the quality that really matters. And with it, the integrity of the market itself. But honestly, what really got me excited is when I went to the FII last year and I saw the head of that task, let's say, under SABIC, I was congratulating him for placing last in terms of how many credits that they were buying. But there's a certain level of maturity in our strategies of how we're approaching these carbon credits. So our ecosystems and let's say our private players like Aramco and SABIC are quite mature in how they're trying to tackle that side of the equation. Maybe very last, I'll be touching on what we are all excited to see with the National GHG crediting scheme that's supposed to be in the pipeline for this year, as well as the other tools that are at our disposal, like the CCUS hub, that's mainly aiming to target 9 million tons by 2027. There's a huge focus on the transition of compatible assets. A few days ago, His Royal Highness mentioned not only, or renewed our mention of our commitments to 50% renewables, 50% natural gas, but we're saying that no plant will be built in Saudi Arabia from this point onwards without a clear commitment to CCUS within those plants. Meaning that in some ways we might be a little bit ahead of the curve of EPA in that regard. So we must not sell ourselves short. It's not only about dreams. We're really focusing on how to make these dreams a reality. And happy to delve into any of those aspects in a bit. But what we should not also forget is maybe the integrity of a lot of our nature-based solutions. We have in the audience here Professor Carlos Duarte, the father of blue carbon. But not only the father of blue carbon, he's assisting in a lot of the issues that are tied to how do you ensure the integrity of what's being done there, also what's deployable. People were really excited about mangroves, forgetting that there are some places that you cannot grow mangroves. There are some places that we're forgetting about with seagrass, and they've done some innovative work with sharks to help map out where seagrasses exist in the Bahamas, for example. So there's a lot of a learning curve to be associated with, and I think finance needs to have the input to know how to react to it. So we must always begin by why are we financing and why are we funding these issues.
Thank you very much, Mashal, for this very comprehensive overview on a lot of the challenges for basically turning CCE from a concept into an implementation. And rightly so, you highlight the importance of bringing in the developing country perspective. When we're talking about finance, this has to be discussed. And this is a very opportune time where we're discussing these issues between COP27 that happened in Sharm el-Sheikh and COP28 that will happen in Dubai. And we also see the developing countries and the global south also taking the stage in multilateralism in the G20, where it was hosted in Indonesia last year and India this year. So we're expecting to not only bring in the developing country perspective on all these issues, but also push the agenda further. And the circular carbon economy really brings that at the heart of it, because it keeps all the options open. And if we're talking about energy, we're giving the developing countries all the options that meet their context and their national circumstances, particularly the hydrocarbons, which has been I would say, attacked in the past in this energy mix. I think it's important to discuss the CCE's implementation in the hydrocarbons industry, and I'd like to invite you, Dr. Mustafa, to give the overview on what are the issues, what are the tools available, what is the perspective of the industry on the CCE, and how can we really move it from concept to implementation?
Thanks, Noura, and thanks.
Can we have the slides, please? Sorry. Can we have the slides on the screen? Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Noura, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this panel. I think it'll be interesting, very interesting. And I wish I'd be able, and within this few minutes, to shed light on how circular carbon can be operationalized within a corporate, within the company. I try to give some broad outlines of how to do that thing, and I think there are 4 areas that are very important. First is framing the circular carbon economy within the activities of the company, whether they are the day-to-day activities or the future planning of the company. How can we map that within the circular carbon economy? So, second is how to prioritize and optimize different activities within the circular carbon economy in the company carbon abatement or carbon management activities, and how to monitor our performance because we want this to be an integral part of our activities, so how to monitor that from day to day, from time to time, compared to others. So benchmarking and targeting will be something important. And overall, to ensure the sustainability of the whole endeavor of integrating zero carbon economy at the corporate level is to look at the governance. The CCE governance will be something also important. This chart is really very close to my heart. I love it. Because this chart really tells you how can, whether at the national level or at a corporate level, whether it is you working on the oil and gas or non-oil and gas, how really we can get to net zero. And so this show the road or a map to a net zero. It is not a linear map. It's not a linear road. This is a circular road which passes through different milestones or different places in the circulation of the hydrocarbon where you can address carbon emissions. You can address them very early through the energy efficiency, material efficiency, or process efficiency. This is through either the reuse functions or through recycle. Also, you can do it at the energy mix level where you can change your energy mix, or you can deploy renewables within your energy mix. That can also capture some of the carbon at that level. You can move further looking at capturing some of the carbon and making use, whether mobile capturing or capturing from fixed sources like power station or gas plants or whatever. And as you move through, again, there are some other areas. You can look at how to utilize the carbon through mineralization, through enhanced oil recovery in the oil and gas, or through changing some products. And at the end, if after all this, we know that there is some hard-to-abate sectors or some hard-to-abate activities, and for those, probably the only way in order to get to a net zero is to look at offsets, and this is really look at neutralizing whatever remaining carbon through use of offsets, either growing your offset yourself or buying offsets from the market, and this is the last stage where you can get to a net zero. This lead us to thinking about the importance of the CDR, carbon dioxide remover, whether directly from the atmosphere or biologically from land or geologically, where you can move it from fixed sources and put it under the ground. So now within this framework, which is very, very interesting, nice framework for how the company can use that framework with CCE to integrate their activities. I think a first step to this is for the companies is to assess the available technologies, look at their costs and their potentials. So they map the technologies within CCS. What are the different abatement technologies available to them? As I say, from energy efficiency up to capturing CO2 and moving it out of the system. Next, I think the best way people use here is to develop what we call margin abatement costs in order to look at the cost and potential together. So looking at this exercise, it is maybe at the beginning it be daunting of the exercise, but it will be give a good educational exercise for the companies to go through this and understand what are the different abatement technology available to them, how they cost, how they compare, what their potential today and in the future. And over all of this, you need come out with some metric, probably the index that the KAPSARC is developing, maybe now at the national level, but can be integrated at the company level. How I can use that index as a metrics to monitor my progress at the company. Next, once you have that back-end things in place, then you move to the performance and benchmarking and targeting. We know that a number of companies probably have a net zero or they have some carbon target, or even if they don't have anything like that, still they can use those measurements and metrics and compare their performance from day to day as they move through the journey of getting to a net zero or reducing their carbon footprint. This should be going through benchmarking to past performance, to benchmarking to peers, and whether you have a net zero or you don't have a net zero. So after that, then will be this is a sustainable part of your business planning. You need to integrate it within your governance system. So that's what I say, that integrating the circular carbon economy within the governance, or putting the governance for circular carbon economy. I think a number of speakers over the last 2 days have talked about the need for this, MRV and governance. And I think this is start with either you have a corporate sustainability report, you want to include the assessment of what you do for your circular carbon economy, what steps you've done as a part of that, you report it. You also build MRVs where you monitor, measure, and report on quarterly basis or annual basis what your progress on the circular carbon economy using the KAPSARC index or whatever metrics you developed. And overall, you need also to communicate. You communicate to stakeholders, you communicate to board of directors, to the community, society as a whole, as a part of ESG. And disclosure will be something very, 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 very important in order to commit you as a company to doing that every time. With that, I stop here and be ready to interact on the policy level and challenges later.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, for this excellent overview on the view from the industry and what are the technologies and the technology initiatives that will contribute into turning the CCE from a concept to implementation. If I can bring you in the conversation, Humam, and if you can talk about the Circular Carbon Economy National Program and its relationship with the key actors in the industry. Like these initiatives that you talked about earlier, who are the implementers? What kind of progress tracking tools do you have? And what kind of relationship do you have with these stakeholders?
Yeah, so just to give you a little brief on the process that we have. So the first or the main thing that we have to note is that we're technology agnostic. In terms of hydrogen, we're also color agnostic. So we're removing that barrier for one reason, is to actually allow all technologies to basically grow and to reach its desired level. Our focus or our aim is to actually get into quick implementations, especially on the high TRL or technology readiness level technologies. Let's take an example on the CCUS, where major national partners basically have gathered together to implement or conduct or construct the carbon capture and utilization and storage project. When it's announced, that means that the ministry, along with these stakeholders, have actually went through all the requirements for that business model to be done or to be constructed in the ground. We engage with these stakeholders sometimes independently, and then we maneuver through the obstacles that may happen. So clearly, there could be some financial feasibility risks that we will connect these entities with stakeholders in that sphere to enable them to go beyond it, whether it's on the funding or on the regulatory aspects. So what we're dealing with is multiple task forces. Some of these task forces are concerning applications in the reuse. Some of them are concerning applications in the recycle or remove. But clearly, the barriers in the industry is that we're all marching into uncharted territory. So risks exist. Stakeholders are not so willing to move forward as quick and as smooth as we desire. Our role in the ministry is to enable going beyond those obstacles, be it from a regulatory, let's say, front, or from a financial front. This is how all of these projects have been previously announced, and this is exactly what we will continue to do. Just to recap or focus on the, let's say, major areas, it's either related to the financial aspects, the regulatory, let's say, environment, But also, sometimes, if the TRL level is low, it's also relevant or related to scalability. How can we take these technologies to larger scale?
Thank you. Humam, if you can give us an example, a real-life example of a project that was born in the CCE national program and then translated into reality, either in Aramco or SABIC or any other example. And it could be a success story, but it could be something that you have learned from. It doesn't have to be something that have materialized.
Yeah, so within the ministry, the CCUS project that is planned in 2035 with the 44 MTPA, the first phase of it is planned to capture 9 million tons per CO2 per annum. That project specifically there are several partners, including Saudi Aramco and Linde. They have signed an MOU during COP 27, but that MOU is the translation of multiple meetings and multiple work on how can we basically deploy such a project. For a CCUS project to be implemented, basically you will need the local champion to be ready to do so. Now, for a local champion to go for that, they either have to have a commitment towards the NDC, or there has to be some feasibility out of this project. Now, moving beyond, let's say, getting the first or major stakeholder, then comes the idea of how would this project be basically, how would CO2 be monitored, be regulated and be verified. Of course, the other questions entail who would be funding such a project? Would there be an investor who is willing to go into such a project? Now, all of these questions are being tackled by multiple stakeholders. That includes the Ministry of Energy, it includes Saudi Aramco, it includes Linde and all the partners basically, to go over these obstacles. However, the ministry is also parallelly working on, for example, regulations with multiple other stakeholders, just to simultaneously make sure that when the project is actually deployed, the right or proper regulatory framework is available. It's going to support operating such a project once it's real, once it's there. I could go on, let's say, the regulatory details.
Excellent example. I think it's great. And if we can zoom into the industry with you, Mustafa, and talk about what are the real barriers to implementation. What is a project like contributing to the national climate targets and the national objectives, such as the initiative just mentioned on the carbon capture and storage? What are the barriers to implementing? If you can give us examples from the industry.
Yes, well, thank you. I think really, and if you look through the whole circular economy, I think really the part which is related to carbon capture and utilization and mineralization and utilization and the use of carbon, hydrogen and others is really the potential areas, and at the same time they are the very risky areas for the private sector to do it by themselves, or corporate sector. And even with mandates and government regulation, I think that may not do the job, because still, even if you put a mandate on NDCs at the corporate level, the corporate may find it cheaper to meet the mandate through other means rather than through investing into the carbon capture and utilization for technology which is not yet mature, not commercialized. And so really, this will lead a different way of partnership between the government and the private sector in order to lift this important technology off the ground, and this require looking at issues related to the infrastructure, looking related to the incentives, related to financing, I think this will be really something that the industry will be looking for in order to be able to act on this very important, I think, technology, and very promising and very essential for Saudi Arabia and the future of hydrocarbon here.
Thank you. And Mustafa, if I can build on this narrative and ask you to specify the top 3 asks that will help in the deployment and scalability of the technologies in the industry, because this is an industry-led initiative, the circular carbon economy, and then you have the enablements from the think tanks and from the government. So if I can ask you to specify the top 3 asks from the government and from the think tank community that will help in the scalability of a particular technology, say the CCUS, for instance, from the industry. It's you, Mustafa.
Yeah, I think that's definitely very important to have that sort of engagement with the industry and partnership. I think this already is going on, and Hammam said that. There's already some talk between the industry and the government in these clusters and hubs for developing of the technology and incubators for development of the technology. I think these all are very important steps. In addition to this, I think also others may be a little bit, people think of it maybe out of the box now, but that's very important, like the way we do it for renewables, the offtake. Offtake will be something important for carbon capture, so that the government enter the market and make an offtake, make a commitment to buy a certain amount of storage, then that give a signal to the industry to invest and go on that. And also commitment for annual commitment for how much to store, be something that even can be auctioned or can be bought by the government, will be also ways. So some other sort, I mean, building the infrastructure, the clustering and all these things as good enablers, but also others out of the box, things like the offtake agreement or other will be something very important in order to commercialize it and move it forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mshahar, if we can bring you into the conversation. So building on what Mustafa was saying, particularly about this, the importance of collaboration, both within the ecosystem that's nationally, but also with the international stakeholders. How can you, do you see, first of all, do you see a role, what role do you see for such collaboration, and how can we really capitalize on collaboration to scale up and commercialize technologies?
Yeah, I think the key to your question, Noura, is the word good. We have to remember that the task that we're undertaking is not, as I always say, a very smooth transformation or transition from one side of the equation to the other with small dials that you're moving up and down. It's a complete transformation of the systems. And it's a complete transformation of the systems that by definition will have a lot of winners and losers, and with it a shake-up of the geopolitical norms. So we have to be mindful of that when we go into these kind of questions, to the point that was made very beautifully earlier in the panel this morning, is that there's a huge crisis of trust. And that crisis of trust will only further intensify. So when we talk about things like the circular carbon economy in the kingdom, the question is usually, okay, great, but are you doing it? Well, yes, we are. As a matter of fact, in Saudi, we follow what I like to call the Bedouin approach, right? Of under-committing and over-delivering. As His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz said 2 days ago, we're not only walking the walk, but we're also talking the talk. And we're doing it on an annual basis. We're trying to have our SGIs sort of geared and stuck towards the COPs. I jokingly say with our friend Laurence Tubiana, you've done this ratchet-up mechanism in the Paris Agreement. We did it with our SGI, so that's our annual ratchet-up mechanism where we build confidence, see what works and see what doesn't. Also, a very important point that Professor Carlos mentioned this morning is the need to stress test our pathways, because we'd be really disillusioned if we thought that there's a point from A to B, and that's how we're going to get there. The matter of fact is, the more that we learn, the more that we know how little we know, and the more that we need pathways to try and accommodate a lot of that issue. So to the point as well, I think we have major opportunities that we can build upon when we're talking about trust. In the spirit of walking the walk, I see our friend Dr. Khalid Asfahani in the crowd. I know he's responsible for a lot of the work that's going to be happening within the Red Sea on coral reefs. When we were mentioning before Montreal or COP15 that we are really dedicating a lot of time and focus to reaching the 30% by 2030 goal and target for marine protected areas as well as land protected areas. So we're always somehow ahead of that curve, but it comes to the point, or the devil is in the detail, is how do we apply it? How do we ensure integrations, things like CORDEP and other platforms that Saudi Arabia has launched help facilitate a lot of the work on that front. But keeping in mind as well, with a lot of humility, the difficulty of doing a lot of this collaboration. So we're not only facing one crisis, which is the climate crisis. There's a big issue on biodiversity. There's a major issue on the right of a just and equitable pathway for social and economic mobility to everyone. So we need to be juggling all of these balls as we're trying to navigate. One new thing that was also mentioned that I think could be grounds for major collaboration, maybe with a lot of our counterparts, is foreign aid conditionalities that Saudi Arabia has mentioned around WEF. That unlike before, it does not mean that we're going to be giving less, but we'll be giving maybe more, potentially, with assurances that this is moving a lot of these countries to more stable governance regimes, let's say, and not government regimes. Last but not least is the need for inclusive, transparent, and credible green taxonomies and standards. And I think unlike what a lot might be flagging, for me, CBAM is a major opportunity for Saudi Arabia when we're talking about the circular carbon economy. That's a major market, if done right, and if we're collaborating on what are those metrics, what are those standards, that could be a major place that could be buying a lot of our innovation from the kingdom. But there's also a lot of money that's being funded. I see our friend Adam Szymanski here, who will be leaving us back to Washington, I hear, in a few days. But the IRA is another major opportunity. I know that our friends in the US are already having trouble deploying a lot of those funds and finances, but if we're proving, or we're walking the talk, let's say, with some of our plants, for some of our direct air capture projects, and so on, I think there's major room for proximity in creating a more, let's say, less turbulent pathway forward.
Thank you very much, Masha'al, for highlighting the importance of collaboration. And I think there's a lot of room for collaboration, both within the kingdom and also across the globe. And we're very honored to have Professor Carlos Duarte with us, and the work that's being developed between KAPSARC and KAUST, as well as other entities. I'd love for this to be an open discussion, and I'd love to invite the audience for Q&A, particularly with the presence of so many bright minds. Shout out to Adam Szymanski and Dr. Adnan Shihabuddin, as well as the esteemed guests. So while you think of your questions and your interventions, I will ask my colleague Thamir to sort of close the loop here. We started with a presentation, a great overview on the results from the Circular Carbon Economy Index. The audience now have a better idea of what the index entails, the indicators that are used, the score of Saudi Arabia between the countries. And then we've heard from the industry, the policymakers, and the think tank on their perspectives on how to really move the circular carbon economy from concept to implementation. We touched upon the many challenges and ideas for collaboration and overcoming these challenges. So back to you, Thamir. After hearing from all our esteemed guests, what insights and inputs do you take for the next level and next version of the CCE Index?
Oh, for the next version or the score, specifically for Saudi Arabia, we are optimistic. We are optimistic, of course. And just a note here, and maybe repeating what my colleagues actually already said, is that you need to give credit to His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman. You can see that the shape of the energy ecosystem and the landscape of the energy and the energy ecosystem in Saudi Arabia changed a lot. It's not the same before 5 years, and of course it's not the same 10 years ago. And we heard about the hubs, we heard about the clusters, we heard about how the policy making mechanism is changed now, and how experts and think tanks, I think Princess Mashal agree with me here, that it actually contribute to this process. We are engaged with a lot of work with the industry at the policy level, at the regulation level, and I think we are making the right move. We are not saying this, we are not actually promoting Saudi Arabia. Numbers are actually talking about that. And major project. One of the hard sectors is the electricity, the transition at the power sector. And you can see the smart meter rollout. It's if you benchmark that globally, you will end up with amazing numbers. And I think Saudi Arabia and the region, especially the Gulf state, will achieve their targets, and they will update their goals for a better one. That's what I can result.
Thank you very much. I see, Mashal, you want to add something to?
Yeah, maybe to tie to Thamir's comment, I think we've taken a new doctrine in Saudi: is no crisis, untapped into or not seen as a major opportunity. Quick example in my day-to-day life is the day that everything closed up during COVID. The very second day, there was a major operation that was being conducted citywide on removing these big barriers and also starting to readdress some of the potholes on the streets. So on that very small example, we're seeing that we've having a major shift in redefinition and mentality of what we see ourselves doing. We've become more and more of pragmatic optimists and of doers in this process.
Thank you very much, Mashal, and thank you, Thamir. I'd like to take the opportunity to highlight some of the exciting work we're doing at KAPSARC. So the circular carbon economy concept has been evolving, and the understanding of it is expanding and deepening, and we're developing a new project under the Climate and Sustainability Department, the Circular Carbon Economy Technology Roadmaps, which hopes to bring even more rigor to the concept of CCE and look at the research, demonstration, development, and deployment of each of the technologies that underpin the circular carbon economy. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor for question and answers. We've heard from our esteemed guests on how to operationalize the CCE concept and how to further collaborate between the industry, the think tanks, as well as the policymakers for advancing the concept of circular carbon economy, but also for real implementation of these projects. Dr. Adnan, can we have a mic to the first row, please?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Noura and the panelists. I am sorry I missed the first 5 or 10 minutes, maybe more, but it has been really very enjoyable.
Can you speak closer, please, Dr. Adnan, to the mic?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I thank you very much, and I'm not going to take much of your time. It's really, I have a specific question. What you have described as a panel and you're summing up tells me that Saudi Arabia is serious about the circular carbon economy, and it's leading by doing. That's more or less the summary. And I've heard it 2 nights ago, of course, eloquently stated by His Royal Highness. The question that comes up, the circular carbon economy was endorsed by the G20 a few years ago when it was first, I think it was in Riyadh, 2020, I believe.
Yes.
And whenever I go to conferences, meeting, there is sometimes, not often, there is a session or a talk about the concept, but it's usually very small and it's more like a framework. Yet what I heard here today is beyond a framework, is what you're doing. So the question comes in, how successful you are in getting your partners, global partners, regional partners, to do what you're doing, instead of just talking about circular carbon economy as a framework. It's really important that if the circular carbon economy will make an impact, that globally something like what you're doing happens. Although many of the activities that are being carried out globally can be classified under circular carbon economy, of course, any project which is CCUS, any project that's nuclear, but in order to sort of really press the pedal and move forward, those countries have to be as proud and as committed to describe what they are doing under the circular carbon economy framework, so one can take stock every year and seeing it increasing and increasing. So that's really my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adnan Shihabuddin, for this excellent question, and I think it builds very well with the narrative developed here. If I can invite maybe Dr. Mustafa first, reflects particularly on the technology scalability and how to congregate the efforts towards that.
I think that's quite interesting, and yes, it is that since 2020, this has been approved by G20 and it's acceptable at G20, but spreading the message to the outside, it has to be either two ways, either through advocacy, and you know that, basically a number of others do not want to promote fossil fuels, and so if this is carbon, zero carbon is a way to promote fossil fuels, they don't want it. So the other way also do is through science, through the literature. And I was a lead author, coordinator or CLA of Working Group 3 for the AR6. And in our assessment of circular economy as a whole, and zero carbon as a subset of circular economy, we look at the literature. And we could only find 3 papers, 3 peer-reviewed articles that can be cited. And while on circular economy as a whole, you have tons of articles. And so the best way we can do is that within a box, we noted that there is something called circular economy. It is it's very promising. It's been accepted by G20 and approved, and we put that into a box. But we cannot move beyond that for policy in terms of what are the policy reference, what are the things, because there's no literature supporting that things. So it is, your point is well taken, that we need really to push the message through peer-reviewed literature, through really, and I think it is something very solid, and as we see, it is very promising, but who is going to do that things? I think only our region will be able to meant to do that things. We don't expect it to be coming from research centers in Europe or other places which are really not interested in the fossil fuel per se. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. I see another question, but let's go to Shehri.
Maybe I'll do a very quick reflection on that question as well. I think that they're already doing a lot of the work on our behalf. To your point, Dr. Ahmed, is that they might not call it the circular carbon economy, but if we saw the rankings that Dr. Thamir was showing up, is that they tend to rank actually significantly higher than we are. That takes me back to the point, is that in a lot of cases, and we have to be very honest, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, there's a perceptions issue. We're never going to be given the exact same treatment as a concept that's being developed or deployed by anywhere else. But there's a huge caveat to that, is that if we do walk the talk, the Bedouin approach, right? If we do deliver, they're already facing a lot of trouble with what they've already committed to. And we're starting to see this, again, to point to the WEF again, is that we've heard less about Scope 3 than we would have heard last year. Reason being is that they actually had to start to deal with that Scope 3 and figure out solutions for it. So the more that we start doing good work under the banner of the circular carbon economy, do something that looks at an integrated approach truly, not only on the energy sector, but on all of the above, on all of emissions, then we're showing them a pathway forward that they could be adopting. But will adoption happen overnight? No. Do we need to have a lot of publications to help push and advocate for it? Yes, perhaps. But I think the winning point is this game-changing perspective of this works. Let's hang on to it because we've already made commitments that we have to make happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mishal. I will take a question from the floor. Adam Szyminski, if you can get a mic to Adam, please.
Thank you. Let me apologize in advance. This is more of a comment than a question. there's 2 points that are very relevant to this excellent panel, and thank you, by the way, Princess Michelle and Noura, for the kind words about me here. There's the 2 points that I wanted to make is yesterday, many of you were in the session on investment and financing. And I wanted to highlight that the Circular Carbon Economy Index is now being looked at very closely by a very large financial institution in Europe as a way to qualify ESG investment in a circular carbon economy concept, right? So they love the idea of, can we show how national financing can qualify for ESG in a broader way than just simply looking at one aspect of the ideas of reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove. The second concept that I thought might be interesting, and it goes to Dr. Adnan's question. How can we advance the circular carbon economy idea? And I love the point you made, Princess Michelle, about it might not be called that, but many countries are following this path. There's in April of 2021, the Biden administration at the U.S. Department of Energy advanced something called the Net Zero Producers Forum. It was Canada, Norway, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and then the UAE, United Arab Emirates, came into this group. So the idea of the Net Zero Producers Forum is actually to look at 3 very key things. Methane abatement, and the kingdom is doing a great job actually in methane abatement. The second thing that they said they would do is get these countries to all advance the concept of the CCE, and they called it that. The third thing that they said was they would push the technological approaches to new energy sources, things like clean hydrogen, and Saudi Arabia is doing a lot there too. The green hydrogen project at NEOM, the blue hydrogen ammonia project that Saudi Aramco is advancing over in the eastern province. So these kinds of things are really, really important, and the CCE is kind of a framework, but it tries to get people to think broadly about solutions, practical solutions that can actually do something about emissions, still leaving the extremely valuable uses that hydrocarbons provide in the global economy. So I apologize again, it's not a question.
No, thank you very much.
If you want to comment on it, I would be delighted. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Adam, for this excellent and very relevant comment. I'll give a chance to the panelists to reflect upon it. I see 2 more questions from the floor. Perhaps we'll take it together. Nick?
Very brief reflection just to add on to your
Yes.
point, Adam. You're absolutely right. We're already starting to see, by the way, we should not be confusing COPs, and I love COPs. I've been to too many COPs, I think, at the degree to which we love it. But for me, that's a lot of noise. That's a lot of what countries are posturing or willing to commit to. What really matters is action on the ground. So while we're hearing, for example, the EU focus on green, 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 no hydrocarbons in the Sharm el-Sheikh, and actually drawing a red line that they ended up crossing, we're seeing their own taxonomies expand the definition of the word green to include transient natural gas as well as nuclear. We're also seeing in a lot of their taxonomy sort of reflect what they're able to import. So not only focusing as they did before on green hydrogen, but now clean hydrogen. So there is a major shift that we're starting to see on the ground.
Great, thank you. You have a question on the floor? Can we get the mic to Nick?
Hello, Nicholas Howarth from the International Energy Agency's Energy Efficiency Division. I'm very glad to be here. My question relates to the topic of energy access, which was brought up, and how this might be incorporated into the CCE concept. We know that almost a third of the global population, 2.5 billion people, still don't have access and struggle to meet basic energy needs, to clean cooking. They still use charcoal, biomass, wood. We also know that in emerging and developing economies, they use around a third of the energy as in advanced economies for buildings and a quarter for transport. So there's clearly a big gap in terms of energy access and energy justice. So the question is, how do you bring this in a very practical way to the CCE concept? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick, for this very important question, which touches upon the classic dilemma between the trade-offs between SDGs, particularly SDG 7 on energy access and SDG 13 on climate action. Can I invite you, Thamir, to reflect on this question and how the CCE really contributes to that debate?
Well, I will actually give more maybe to, if you can join me.
Sure, any of the panelists.
But I will comment on how we actually see. So again, I will go to the index, not the concept level, but I will go how we actually see energy access and energy justice. Before that, and this is quote from His Royal Highness when he introduced the concept, is that it builds on 3 pillars: energy security, economic prosperity, and human wellness. So regardless of what you call it, it's within these boundaries. Now, when we are looking at or how we view energy access, energy justice as an enabler factors to achieve carbon circularity. Now, I will take it maybe more technical on how you actually quantify these, and there is a big debate in that. And since we are talking about the index, we also collaborate with leading metrics developer or global developers of metrics on that area, such as the Energy Trilemma Index, and we have a work stream with them to actually expand on these dimensions and bring on these quantification, important insight to the concept and to the policymaker and expert to process this. So I hope, I know that Michelle have a comment on that. So.
Thank you, Thamir. Please, Michelle, could you elaborate?
I mean, I'm going to steal again from our friend Carlos Duarte. He's in the room and he seems to be tweeting nuggets of information to us in real time. So he's just reminded us that the human brain at rest consumes an energy equivalent to 60 watts of incandescent light bulb. So globally, this is 420 gigawatts hour of energy. If we're really thinking, again, to another metric that since we have the IEA that's formulating this question, what we're dedicating to, say, 50 kilowatt per hour per year for an individual in Africa in a rural area should be sufficient. That same amount of electricity is being consumed currently in the United States in 33 hours. So we're telling people that what the Americans are consuming in 33 hours, they should be consuming within a whole year. So there's a major gap between the two that we have to be thinking about. I think maybe I'll speak on behalf of Saudi, and I think that that's, for me, where there's a major opportunity. There's a certain level of maturity that's happening when we're talking about a lot of our efforts, even on the climate front. We're not only tying it to the Saudi Green Initiative, but there's the Middle East Green Initiative, where a lot of the efforts for clean cooking stoves, and when we're saying clean cooking, we're not only talking about natural gas, but there's also solar that's currently being deployed. There's a lot of aid conditionalities, foreign aid conditionalities that I've mentioned a few minutes ago, and I think if we can build harmonization between the IMF, the World Bank, a lot of these multilateral banks, but also countries, and how they're approaching comprehensively this issue of aid, this issue of climate. Climate cannot be treated within a silo on its own. I think the SDGs sometimes have that tendency of having these SDGs being targeted and siloed within the process. So having some kind of an integrated approach of multiple countries, maybe like-minded individuals, or like-minded countries in the beginning, could build a coalition that have the level of maturity of what are we trying to do for those countries? Are we assuming what their needs are, or are we integrating them into that process?
Thank you very much, Michelle. I will take one final question. I'm just wary of the time. I see Tatsuya, the chairman and CEO of IEEJ. Please go ahead.
Tatsuya Terza from IEJ Japan. A quick question about CCS. A quick question is, can you accept CO2 from outside of Saudi Arabia to be stored here in Saudi Arabia? The follow-up question is that, do you have the necessary regulatory framework in place to accept CO2 from outside of Saudi Arabia? And if the answers are no, do you have any policy for the future to consider accepting CO2 from outside of Saudi Arabia to CCS location within Saudi Arabia?
Thank you very much, Tatsuya, for this very important question. Humam, can I give you the opportunity to answer?
Again, the regulatory, let's say, area hasn't been firmed up. It's a work in progress. Yet, I can clearly highlight that the kingdom is committed to its own net zero. Basically, the NDC, the National Determined Contributions, and hence the focus is actually meeting that. Currently, all the scenarios are considering, let's say, in-kingdom emissions and in-kingdom emissions reductions, and that will be the priority.
Thank you, Mshal.
Yeah, sorry to hog the mic, but maybe to add a point to that. This is something that I've experienced first person in Iceland. We're lucky enough, the nerds that we are, Noura and myself, to be at the ground one, let's say, of where they're doing a lot of the injections underground for carbon storage. And what we saw was that a shipment, because of this hub that they were building up in Iceland, of CO2, or methane, I think biomethane, if I'm not mistaken, had already arrived from Switzerland before the port was already built, right? So it was already there because they've already committed to it. But then they needed to inject that, and they still needed to figure out what to do with it. So there was this beautiful box of biomethane that's just sitting on the sidelines waiting to be dealt with. I think we have a certain level of maturity in the kingdom before we set out these regulations to understand how can we store that carbon? Where are the optimum locations? What are the economics of it? How can we build a resilient economy out of it and jobs associated with it? So this is the role of Aramco with a lot of the brilliant pilots that they're rolling out that hopefully maybe you can touch on, Mustafa.
Thank you very much. And if I may add, Tatsuya, a lot of the questions you ask can be answered by implementing Article 6, both for market and non-market approaches. So the more we do projects, the more we will learn about the shortcomings or the gaps that there are in once it comes to implementing these carbon exchanges and credits. I'd like to ask if any of the panelists would like to add to the conversation. Otherwise, we're approaching the end of our Dr. Mustafa, please.
Well, we thank the audience. I thank people here and my colleague in the panels. One last thing that I would like to, for Thamir and his group, is for this index really, to make it a little bit more popular and to look at like downscaling it at the corporate level. So how can we create an index similar or make that index at the corporate level? And then also we need some sort of awareness for industry to really to make it as part of the ordinary metrics that they use. That'll be great. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists for an excellent discussion and the audience for a dynamic conversation. Thank you all.